6 days of every week, the West Australian is printed for us, the newspaper reading public. Just the West, thanks.
70 cents, thank you.
Much.
Thanks very much.
Each edition contains, among other things, national news, state politics, strikes, international conflict, local issues, and for the most part is a work of non-fiction. Yet, in among all that factual information is the work of a select group of journalists who have an extraordinary freedom to disseminate their personal opinions. They can just about say what they like.
The one I remember vividly was a remark I made years ago about the Love Boat. It was going on. It was a special Love Boat program. It was going to Antarctica or somewhere, and I said I hoped it hit an iceberg and sank, which I thought was, well, it was obviously just a throwaway line. Well, all these people rang up and said that's a terrible thing to say. People might drown. Oh, please.
People know it's a column. They know that it's not meant to be an impartial article about France. And I, in fact, said in that piece that you probably noticed by now that I'm a francophobe. And
so Andre Milan concedes he does not like France or things French. In his own words, Andre is a francophobe. Pamela Casellas, equally honest, has no love for television's Love Boat. Pam and Andre are the Columnists, and this program is about what makes them tick.
I had a press conference this morning and they've confirmed that Kira Glennon was last seen at the computer shop in Bayview Terrace.
In this third-floor office at the West's headquarters in St George's Terrace, Perth, they're mapping out the day's coverage, much of which will become tomorrow's newspaper. The serial killer is big, naturally, but so is government industrial policy.
We're going to Kirith for a reaction to leaked documents that we had on Saturday.
And whatever Pauline Hanson is up to.
We're going to go to filing and ask who's on Hanson's side as far
The editorial conference is attended by the West Chief of Staff, editors and sub-editors, the people who call the shots, in other words, and dictate the shape of the next edition. Our two columnists, however, are not present. No one here mentions their workload or what they'll be writing. It's as if they march to the beat of a different drum. Andre Milan has been up early. Between 5 and 6 is his best time to toss around ideas in a fresh mind. Then he's at work by 8:30 to continue and refine the thinking process and devour the various dailies.
it's never easy. Sometimes you sort of sit in front of that terminal and they say you sit there and wait for little beads of blood to appear on your forehead because you're sweating so much and thinking so hard.
Andre was born in South Africa, where he was a cadet on the Star before setting out to see the world. In 1968, he arrived in Fremantle and hitchhiked to Perth looking for work.
I walked down the terrace and applied for a job with the West, and they said, when would you like to start? And I said, well, I'm doing nothing this afternoon. So they said, why don't you start on the 2 o'clock shift?
Those were different, perhaps easier times. Today, in keeping with its high-powered corporate home, the newspaper looks only at university majors, even double majors, for its cadet intake. This morning, they gather in the newsroom. Cadets with their counsellor, Peter Beck. Chief of Staff, Tony Barras, with today's orders. Amanda Bauer, the medical reporter, with her next page one exclusive in mind. And inside covers Roger Martin, planning how best to stir the day's pot. The names you would probably know because of their bylines, the faces you might not. But whether they call themselves reporters, editors or columnists, they're all variations on a theme of journalist.
As the name implies, a news reporter's job is to report an event, whether it's happening in Parliament or in the courts or a protest down the street, and to report that as accurately as he can. A columnist, I guess, has a bit more, is more at liberty to inject his own views and his own opinions into the articles that he writes. And obviously it's equally important that whatever information you include is dead accurate. I mean, whether you're writing opinions or whether you're writing straight news stories, I think people expect that, that you write them accurately and honestly.
A few kilometres away in the suburbs, at her home, which is her place of work, and bound by those same basic rules of accuracy and honesty, Pam Casellas is expecting a delivery. The courier from Channel 9 and those from the other channels beat a path to her front door with the raw material for Pam's daily television column. It's a long, long way for the girl from the Great Southern.
Well, when I was a very small child at primary school in Williams, I was always quite good at English, and my headmaster said to me, "You should be a journalist." And at that stage, and probably until I started my cadetship at the West, I was never terribly sure what a journalist did. As I was the youngest cadet of that intake, so I spent many, many months, in fact most of that year, typing television programs and aircraft arrival and departures and all those things. It was very much a basic cadetship in those days. You really did all those nuts and bolts things. I don't think they do now, but they did then. No, I don't think one can do it now. They don't take people straight from school. In my day, when I started, they would take some from school, some from different levels of university, and some who'd been working as copy runners or in the library or in the reading room or really anywhere else at all. So for me, it was quite a big jump. It was a completely different life, I suppose, but I think perhaps the jump now is not quite so great because the cadets that they take on now are a bit more experienced. They know the world a bit better, certainly, than I did. And I think you can learn to become a journalist, certainly to a degree, but I think you also have to have a skill with words and a feeling for words, perhaps more than a skill with words, but you have to have an ear for words and you have to enjoy words and the whole business of playing with words.
Back at the West, Andre Milan also makes the most of his love for words as he prepares his next column. Whatever the subject, he'll want his effort to be a mix of information and opinion. As it happens, Anzac Day is looming. As it happens, Super League is planning a football game come Anzac extravaganza. As it happens, this has the full approval of the RSL. Andre is utterly opposed. He's already typing emotive phrases like 30 pieces of silver. His mind would appear to be well and truly made up. He's in fact accusing the RSL of selling out a national tradition.
You're dead right, my mind is made up, but I think I'm honour bound to give an explanation of why Super League wants to run this event.
Will you write your column purely from your experience, or will you go out to find out what the man in the street thinks about it, for instance? You might be wrong, you might be in a minority.
Well, I might, but I think people understand that if you write a column, when you write your own opinion. And boy, my opinion is often very, very different from... I wrote one notorious column, which I still stand by it, in which I was very critical of the French.
Now that the French have ceased their nuclear testing in the Pacific Ocean, should we overlook the monumental arrogance with which they continued to explode the devices for many years after Australia and other Pacific countries pleaded with them to stop?
Probably going to make myself unpopular with the French all over again, but they were fairly uncooperative. They have a reputation for being an arrogant people.
In our delight that French sailors have been saved from sinking yachts, are we meant to forget that in 1985, French government agents deliberately and for the very worst of reasons sank a vessel in which a man drowned in New Zealand?
I think that if Australians had sent agents to France and they were responsible for the murder of innocent people or person in France in the same way that the French agents were responsible for the murder of somebody in New Zealand, that it could almost, in this country, there would have been an inquiry that would and should have led to a change of government.
I, for one, have maintained my rage against the French and have little sympathy for their pathetic attempts to compensate for their embarrassments of this century with delusions of grandeur.
Hi Steve, how are you?
Good, Andre, how you going?
Good, good.
You might wonder how anyone can write such strong stuff. You might wonder how anyone can write such strong stuff and get away with it. Who, if anyone, is there to keep an eye on Andre?
It's only one page, page 14. It's a mono page, and there's a 28 by 5 ad on it. So we'll run you across the top, and then maybe do Tom Connors underneath.
Okay.
So if we need an illustration, it would only be small. But speaking about illustrations, I thought Saturday's illustrations weren't that good. I spoke to Leith about it in conference. They were too dark, and there's too much in them. And
This meeting with Steve Loxley, a colleague, is purely informational, so the paper knows what Andre's doing. In this case, the Anzac article. There's sure to be an opinion expressed about the last column, but no censorship, as Andre is quick to point out.
Not at all. This is the wonderful thing about this job and about this country, is that within the bounds of the laws of libel and public decency, I guess, I'm totally free to say whatever I wish. And I haven't had a word since I've been doing this column in the West now, which is only about 5 or 6 months. I haven't had a word censored, or I remember that French article we were talking about, the editor said, wow, that's pretty strong stuff, I don't agree with any of this. But there was no attempt to censor what I was writing for the simple.
Nor was there any opposition when Andre launched into the Church of Scientology, the global religion with high-profile converts like Tom Cruise. His targets are usually among the biggest around.
I try not to have a go at easy targets, things like these emotive topics like Asian immigrants, Aboriginal youths who steal cars. I try not to, my aim is not, although I like to stimulate debate and to get people interested in subjects, I don't really want to get people hot under the collar and having them ring up as they do for to talkback radio stations and say that the Asian immigrants should be blown out of the water, refugee boats should be sunk and that sort of thing. So you ask if I censor myself. I do to the degree that I wouldn't write anything obscene or anything offensive or anything which in my opinion is blatantly unfair.
It's an enormous freedom, isn't it? How do you feel about that?
I love it. I think it's a terrific freedom, and I think that if I was to go, I think this is the other sort of checks and balances that we have in a democracy like ours. If I was to go completely overboard and was to become reckless, irresponsible, if I didn't, if I showed a disregard for the truth, and if I'd simply sniped at people, there would be a reaction that would ultimately see me losing my job, because
The television columns of Pam Casellas mightn't seem as momentous as an attack on France, and probably won't cause international tremors. But what Pam writes each day is no less influential. That's because television is a huge national industry. There's a lot of money and ego tied up in TV, and Pam is able to bluntly say what she thinks of the product and its people.
Do you have a free hand, or...?
Absolutely, absolutely.
From what choices, though?
From the choices that are really on the page in front of you. The choices are not all that wide, and some days it's absolutely awful because there's nothing there at all. And those are the days that you really have to dig quite deeply and come up with something. That's the downside of having a daily column, that there is something that has to be brought up every day. And the days when you open the magazine or the guides and there are 3 or 4 things there are wonderful. You wake up with a sense of anticipation, but other days, Tuesday's always an awful day to write about.
To what extent, though, Pam, are you fed the information by the magazines, by the TV publicists?
Certainly, every station has a publicity department, and their job is to feed me the information that they want me to have. But within that, the choices are mine completely.
Do you ever get any pressure from the publicist?
No, I think they work on the assumption, certainly in Perth, that as long as you talk about a program, that's all they can expect you to do. They don't necessarily expect you to like it or expect you to be glowing in your praise of it, but if you ignore it, they tend to get a bit snitchy. But mostly they recognise that they really have no say at all. It's our paper and we'll put into it what we want to put into it.
Does the paper have any policy at all towards TV reviews?
I'm sure they would hate to think that I was being swayed by the fact that I was being sent to launches or, you know, being taken out for lunch or whatever it happened to be. But I'm sure they're quite confident that I still make my own decisions.
For Pam Casellas, you could say that life is fairly dominated by the box. TV stations send copies of just about all their programs. They expect Pam to view them. This takes time.
Whenever I'm about to sit down to write about a program, well, I'll go through the schedules and say, well, I've got to watch this, I've got to watch this, I've got to watch this, I've got to watch this. Might watch that. That might be good. And then work out what I've got to watch in the course of the week, I suppose. And I watch at night, I watch in the morning, I watch in the afternoon, whenever it's convenient for me to watch.
Sounds a perfect job, but is there a downside to this?
There is a downside to it because, well, the same downside probably that anyone who works at home has, that you never get away from it. The day's never ended. There's always something to do. You instead of coming home from work at 6 o'clock and not having to think about it till tomorrow, particularly with television, because so much of it happens at night, you're always watching just to keep up with things, because I do try and keep up with most of the series, just so that on that bad day you can dredge in and find something out of a Blue Heelers or an ongoing series that if you haven't watched you can't sort of come into otherwise. And I think the other downside is that people, including your family, don't think you work, and they pop in and pop out again, and mum can drop us here and mum can do this and mum will do that. And so you have to be, I was going to say you have to be disciplined, but I'm not really. I'm not very disciplined at all. As long as I meet my daily deadline, that's about as much discipline as I can get into my life.
People have said in the past, that a job like mine, you could, in this new age, you could do it from home, but I find I get a lot of benefit out of my colleagues. You've seen out in the newsroom how we have a group of people sitting around in desks. I love to try ideas. I've got some good friends in the buildings, try my ideas against them, and a lot of them volunteer ideas that I pick up and go with. So I think it's very important not to work in a vacuum, to sort of bump up against as many people as you can.
I go into the office every couple of days just to check mail and just to have meetings and discussions with my sub-editors and my editors and things. I have a modem at home and a computer system, and I send my copy down the line via modem to the office so that it's there about mid-morning every day, and it's called up on sub-edit. It goes just straight into a computer bank, obviously, and it's just called up by sub-editors and dealt with there in the same way as it would if I was working in the office. I'm obviously in touch by phone all the time. I have faxes and whatever here, email, internet.
But you don't need the day-to-day, the rubbing of the shoulders with the rest of the journalists?
Well, some people do. I don't work at home because I don't want to be there. I work at home because I work more efficiently at home. And look, it's really happened because I started doing this job when my children were small, and it was the sort of perfect job you can do with kids crawling around. And even though I can't use them as an excuse to stay home now, it just works well. It means I can watch television in my own way and in my own home and in the way really that people watch television, rather than sitting in an office or going out to the channels to preview.
As Pam Casellas watches television with her daughters, the very picture of suburban normality, it's time to ask who she has in mind when she's praising ER and the Footy Show, revelling in British literary classics, or bagging the latest Australian soap.
I think it's very personal. I try to be an average viewer. I don't think that I don't know that anyone does, any special insights, any special talents. I just see myself as a viewer making the same sorts of decisions that a viewer makes when they get home from work and sit down and think, what shall I watch today? And that's all I try and do. I try and sort of find a path through the trees, if you like. I don't ever have in my mind that I would like to promote a program because I want it to work or for whatever reason. I mean, there are programs that I like and some that I don't like, and I'm never ashamed of saying that. I don't think you can possibly hide your prejudices, so you might as well make a virtue of them.
It is, at its most basic, a catty little piece of television made up of interviews with unimportant people in her life.
In terms of public reaction, do you ever make a wrong call and you cop flack?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Tell me about it.
People are very quick to criticise. They're very quick to write abusive letters. We get some wonderfully abusive letters. I probably have some around somewhere, but the ones that we always hate are the ones that come with a cutout of the article, and they've been written in across with red biros and pens and bits scrawled across them, and they're always a bit lunatic. But they're a reaction, and people are perfectly entitled to their reaction.
It seems about time the characters of Maggie and PJ are given new direction. Lisa McCune's Maggie has been in danger for some time now of becoming pious and sanctimonious.
Do you have a really full understanding of the power that you have? You say you're an ordinary writer from an ordinary viewpoint, but you do have a power, don't you?
Well, only to a degree. I can say to people that this is the best thing that's ever been made and you mustn't miss it. And they may well turn on because because I've said or because it's been pointed out to them. But I can't make them stay there. And I can't make them come back again next week.
Interestingly, one of Andre Molin's more outspoken columns also dealt with television. In this case, The Simpsons, which was under attack. Not that the family could ever be underdogs, but they had run into some powerful opposition in Perth. And there was another reason Andre weighed in.
I'm conscious of the fact that I'm sort of 50 years old, a baby boomer, so I've got to be careful that I don't only write for people my own generation, and so I make a conscious attempt to write about things. For instance, last Saturday I did a piece about the Simpsons. Catholic educators in WA had said that The Simpsons was an example of a show that glorifies stupidity, and I disagreed vehemently because I think it's a genius. I think The Simpsons is a wonderful show full of all sorts of subtleties and layers of meaning and good moral messages as well.
Bart Simpson would be pleased to hear that, but perhaps ticked off at not being interviewed. For both Andre and Pam, the interview is regular source material for their columns. And here, basic rules apply.
It's got to be made clear when you start the conversation that this is either on or off the record, and if they agree to anything being on the record, of course then you do it. But this, I don't think you would last for very long as a journalist in this town if you didn't respect people's wishes to, to speak either on or off the record.
And when you interview so many people for this article, do you use a tape recorder or notes, or how do you go about it?
A lot of interviews, because I'm in Perth and they're in the eastern states, are of course done by phone.
And recorded?
No, I just take notes, shorthand, bits of shorthand, my own particular brand of shorthand.
Are there any rules for the interview? In terms of what's on the record, what's not on the record, do you tell them? How do you go about it?
Occasionally they will say something, but I'd rather you didn't say that, and I would always respect that. It's no problem as far as I'm concerned. Occasionally you'll get from a publicist a request that you don't ask someone about their girlfriend or whatever, which is not usually a problem either. I'm not particularly interested in their girlfriends, I'm more interested in their performance.
In a working life spent making critical assessments of others, it's only fair that the columnists make a final assessment of the work they do. Is it literature, or is it just a job?
It depends. Some days I know perfectly well that I've just done the job. Other days I might read it and think, yeah, that was good, I like that. I suppose it's like any other job you do. Sometimes you do something well and sometimes you do it adequately, and sometimes you do it badly, I suppose. I hope you don't do it badly too often, but look, I don't think it's brain surgery by any means. I don't think it's going to win any Pulitzer Prizes either. But I think within the confines of what I do, I'm generally happy with it.
Sometimes if you write a column that you feel, gee, that's terrific, that really says what I want to say, it expresses it well. Other times you say, gee, I'm not really happy with that. It's not as fluent as I'd like it to be, and maybe the message isn't as well conveyed as I'd like it to be.
What do you do then?
Well, it's too late.